Mexico's president is pushing back on President-elect Donald Trump's claims they reached a verbal agreement on the border and migration. She says her country's firm position is not to close borders.
As the Trump transition ramps up, there's new disagreement emerging between the president-elect and Mexico's new president, Claudia Sheinbaum. Trump said they spoke on Wednesday and reached a deal on immigration and drug smuggling. But on Thursday, Sheinbaum pushed back on those claims, saying she never agreed to close the border or crack down on illegal migration. And details of a plan to avoid a costly trade war are still being worked out.
From our point of view, there are going to be other conversations between the teams between now and when he takes office.
Earlier this week, Trump threatened a 25% tariff on exports from Canada and Mexico unless more is done to stop the flow of drugs and migrants from reaching the U.S. border. The National Retail Federation says Americans could lose up to $78 billion in a trade war with those countries. But most experts say it likely won't get that far.
I think this is possibly a threat from Mr. Trump that he's using to try to elicit some concessions from these countries.
The current president weighed in on the back and forth on Thanksgiving, urging Trump to, quote, rethink the tariff threat and find a way to work with the Mexican and Canadian governments.
We're surrounded by the Pacific Ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, and two allies, Mexico and Canada. The last thing we need to do is begin to screw up those relationships.
President-elect Trump says he's also imposing an additional 10% tariff on all Chinese goods coming into the U.S.
Joining us live is Professor of Political Science at the University of California, DeSipio. Lewis, thank you so much for joining us. Certainly, tariffs and immigration were big election promises from President-elect Donald Trump. But what do you make of the conversation that he had with the President of Mexico?
Well, clearly they didn't communicate very well. President Trump heard one thing and President Sheinbaum probably offered something else. This will clearly be a topic of continued conversation between the two countries for the next 2 months before the inauguration and then after. The United States depends on Mexico, not just for agricultural goods, not just for manufacturing, but also to help with its immigration enforcement. And Mexico has been critical, both in the Trump administration and in the Biden administration. President Trump knows well that he can't alienate Mexico if he wants his immigration policies to succeed.
Two other major trading partners, Canada and China, that he's certainly saying that he's going to impose the tariffs on. There's talk that it could spark a trade war, slow economic growth. Donald Trump saying it's more, it's a better thing perhaps for the new and existing companies. So there's mixed reaction with this kind of situation here as well. But what do you make of what's happening in terms of the tariffs potentially for China and Canada?
Well, I think there are probably two different stories. President Trump did impose a series of tariffs on China in his first term and will likely continue that and expand on them in his second term. He sees that as part of a sort of a global strategy to control growth in China. I think Canada is a very different story. Many of the goods that are produced in Canada and imported into the United States are exports from the United States, such as cars and car parts that would wreak havoc in the U.S. economy if he were to impose a 25% tariff. So there, I think he's just in his mind pairing Mexico and Canada because he entered into an agreement with them during his first term, the revised NAFTA. I think President Trump throughout his next administration is going to use the threat of tariffs as a way of getting other countries' attention to begin negotiations about issues that he's concerned about. There will not be a 25% tariff on either Canada or Mexico.
All right, and President Trump 2.0, we are seeing his appointments, including General Keith Kellogg, nominated to serve as assistant to the president and special envoy for Ukraine and Russia. He made mention that the war could be over in 24 hours, including potentially the Middle East, Ukraine, Russia. What's your opinion on this appointment and other appointments that he has announced?
With few exceptions, the people that are being appointed to these senior positions don't have a lot of experience in the areas where they're being given a mandate. This will make it hard to resolve international challenges that the United States is facing, unless the United States just concedes. And that's sort of the what we're seeing as a potential for Ukraine. The one exception to that, I think, is Senator Rubio, who's been nominated for Secretary of State. He has extensive foreign policy experience and is what might be considered sort of a traditional nominee in a Republican administration. So far, loyalty has been the key rather than experience in the area that the appointees are being nominated for.
And as you know, here in Australia, we've got world first laws for social media bans for 16 years and under. It's going to take a year to implement, but it passed the Senate yesterday, and there's mixed reaction here in Australia. It certainly made worldwide news. What are you hearing?
Well, it is making worldwide news. I read about it on the front page of the New York Times this morning. I think the key is in the implementation. How Australia is able to design a program that prevents young people 16 and younger from getting access to the websites that are perceived of as dangerous. My understanding is the law is not explicit on that, and it will be up to the administration to implement that. From the U.S. perspective, I'm relatively comfortable saying that there would be no support for similar legislation here, no matter how successful it is from either parents or kids 16 and younger.
Yeah, well, I think a week ago, Elon Musk posted, it seems like a backdoor way to control access to the internet by all Australians, a $50 million fine for the big tech companies that do breach these new to be made laws. But do you think it's really going to bother them? And I think one of the other big questions is we all know that so many of our young people are very tech savvy, and they'll find different loopholes that are potentially more dangerous.
Oh, absolutely. I think that this creates a big business for proxy servers throughout the world that will allow young people to get access to these programs. I think the big tech companies may not fear the fines explicitly, but they like to stay in good stead places where they're operating. So they will look for ways to cooperate with the Australian government, if not concede all access to young people 16 and younger.
Yeah, certainly mixed reviews, but it's certainly been welcomed by a lot of people. Lewis, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day, and happy Thanksgiving for yesterday.
Well, thank you very much. Have a good day.